gather your party before venturing forth.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Dungeon Pub once again. This is Happy Hour. This is the Ranger Part 4. Finally, we have gotten to the end of the Ranger review. It's been quite the journey for everyone involved. 2 hours of content. It's been so fun to do. Everyone around here loves the Ranger. It's been such a project. Now then, last part of a class review here in the Dungeon Pub usually talks about how to build the class and what's good and what's not and what works and what doesn't. What stats are you going to need? What's the best race? Stuff like that. With the Ranger, I figured let's do something a little bit more extensive. Why? Because Rangers are strange in 5th edition, and because of the rebuild and because of the way that the class is in terms of gameplay, it requires a bit more attention, let's say. So here's what I'm thinking. If you're looking for a guide, go onto the internets, go to Google, just find a Ranger guide. There's amazing ones out there done by the community. All the numbers are already crunched. And you can see what works and what doesn't, what's good and what's not. So I'm not going to do that for you. Instead, what I want to do is, if you are on my table and you want to play a Ranger, irrelevant of how much experience you have, these are the things that I'm going to tell you as the DM while you're looking at that book, you're reading the abilities, you're reading the spells, looking at the pets, and stuff like that. Let's begin somewhere. Where do we usually begin when building a class? Let's look at the ability scores and what each one is going to do for this platform that you're gonna use to emphasize your idea on my table. First and foremost, dex. Okay, let's get that out of the way. Rangers, because of the way that they are, because of the abilities that they have, Rangers of all the martial classes are intended to use dexterity. I believe that they're intended to do so by design, and while you can make interesting builds going off of strength and even sheer constitution, Dex is what you're good at, alright? Dex is what you're supposed to be doing. Now, considering the ability score itself, I still venture to say Dex is the most powerful ability that you can stack, especially when your class goes off of it. Why? Because it gives you so many things that are good. Dexterity saving throw is the most common saving throw in the game. Most of the spells, traps, stuff like that, they're gonna check your dexterity saving throw. Initiative, very important for Rangers. You're supposed to have a lot of it. You're supposed to deal damage, get out of there fast. Armor class. Armor class also comes off of dexterity. What else though? Well, finesse weapons can allow you to have an entire melee platform based around dexterity. And then, of course, the shooting. Ranged weapons go off of dexterity. So, all of these things that a Ranger, or a Garden Variety Ranger, is supposed to be good at go off of dex. I don't need to speak more. Dexterity is going to be your primary stat. What comes next though? Well, wisdom. Interestingly enough, Rangers need a lot of wisdom, not only because you have all those skills that go into wisdom, and whatever doesn't go into wisdom goes into dex, but also because of the spellcasting. We're gonna get to spellcasting when we're done with the ability scores, but understand Rangers don't have that great of a selection of spells, and by great I don't mean good, I mean vast. There's not that many Ranger spells out there, so the ones that you do pick, the ones that you will want to have in your possession, will need to work, okay? You don't have that much leeway, so those are gonna have to have an effect. And because you have the normal allocation of spell slots, whatever in terms of a spell that you're throwing out there will need to have an effect if you are going to be effective in the battlefield. Moving right along though, wisdom, dexterity, kind of obvious. Constitution. Constitution is going to be the next ability score that you're going to take a look at, and if you are building a character and I'm right next to you having my coffee before the game, I will tell you this. Unlike any other class in the game, Rangers are mostly geared towards being ranged DPS. Consider that for a moment. Yes, other classes can indeed make very powerful ranged builds, but Rangers have all of those abilities coming from the class, and especially the Hunter Conclave, that allow you to be a very, very effective ranged damage dealer. You can be effective without stacking Constitution. The Garden Variety Ranger doesn't have to overload on Constitution. There are mechanics in the game that go very unnoticed, especially when you're a beginner player, but also, I've come to find out, even in more experienced games, there are mechanics, considering combat, that don't get their spotlight as often as they have to. Cover being one of them. You are ranged, okay? You don't have to be sticking it out there with the guys that deal a lot of damage, which means that you can position yourself in such a way that you can take cover. Especially if you're a race that is smaller in stature. So consider your halflings, consider your gnomes. You can be very, very defensively oriented without stacking armor and HP. Cover is going to give you that additional few points of armor class that will end up saving your life. So, Constitution is not going to be your focus. Unlike the Barbarian, unlike the Fighter, unlike the Paladin, you can run away. Pun very much intended, without having so much Constitution. So what else is there? Intelligence, Rangers don't need to know books, moving right along. Charisma, leave that to the charismatic people. Leave it to the Paladins, leave it to the Sorcerers, leave it to the Bards.
Hi. How you doing? The name's Flynn Rider. How's your day going? Huh?
And lastly, obviously, strength. Now, strength is this very confusing thing for beginner players that want to play a ranger, because you have a proficiency in the saving throw and they're thinking, okay, maybe I should know. No, you don't. Actually, as a matter of fact, the logic here is that if you are going to be a garden variety ranger, strength is your defensive stat. Interestingly enough, most of the things that will want to hurt you in melee, and they will try to bully you, thus having this proficiency in a strength saving throw is good for you. But that also means that you don't have to have all that much of an ability score in there, because that proficiency is going to help. Coupled with your maneuverability, coupled with the fact that you don't have to stick it out in melee, for those moments where that's going to be important, you have that proficiency. For everything else, feel free to blink away. And that's the abilities. Kind of simple when you look at it from that perspective. Now, yes, we're taking a look at one singular build. We're going to branch out of that in just a moment, but let's get a few things out of the way. Garden variety rangers and spells. As I said before, your selection is not all that vast, which means whatever you're going to take, it's going to have to work. Now, there are some spells that are, I would venture to say, mandatory. That doesn't make them cookie cutter, that makes them more like the Paladin Smite, okay? Smites for Paladins are the cornerstone of their offensive game. For you, that's going to be, come on, you know what that's going to be. Hunter's Mark is a wonderful spell. It scales very well. You can move it around between targets, and it's going to be the source of your damage. But as I said in the previous videos, Rangers work the best when they can couple a few effects onto their targets. So consider your abilities, consider the fact that you can come off of stealth, consider your positioning, advantage and disadvantage, and then slap that Hunter's Mark onto the target and then do your business. That's going to result in you dealing horrific amounts of damage, especially at higher levels, especially if you're a hunter. You can just destroy something outright and then go run behind something. Other offensive spells are going to focus more on control. You do have Hail of Thorns, which also kind of helps with multiple targets. So in the beginning, focus on these. Focus on making these work, understand which situations they can be the best at. Other than this, utility. Those are the two kinds of spells that you're going to focus on. Either they're going to work in combat and they're going to make your character do what it's supposed to do, or they're going to work outside of it. So consider things like Goodberry in terms of the idea that you need to have in your head. Something that will help everyone around you. It's fluffy in a way, but it's intended to work outside of combat. And now when you consider it that way and you think to yourself that you have just as many spell slots as any other class in your category, then now you see what I mean. You need to very carefully pick those spells and make them work. That's a core gameplay mechanic for the Ranger, and that's pretty much all I have to tell you about the spells. Now, in terms of selection, as I keep saying, the selection is very important. What are you going to see when you go over the levels? At first level, as I said already, Hunter's Mark is going to be important. Hail of Thorns can also be this wonderful addition to your repertoire. But what else is there? Well, Cure Wounds. There you go. Detect Magic, Detect Poison and Disease. Now, these are supporting spells. Right out there, you can see that. I don't even have to tell you. And when it comes to supporting spells, consider these versus Goodberry, stuff like Fog Cloud, and consider what you have in your party as well. I usually don't tell this to people. I'll tell them, hey man, go with whatever you want your character to have. Make it fluffy and make it fit whatever you have as an idea. But if you're considering a optimal build, then you're gonna have to look at what you're gonna play with. Now, there are other spells in here that I find very interesting. Stuff like, for example, Ensnaring Strike. This is a very, very solid spell, and it controls. So when people see it for the first time and they look at a thing like Hunter's Mark, and they instantly get that thought of, should I, shouldn't I? Yeah, control is important, especially if you're going to be a Garden Variety Ranger, because you want that thing that shouldn't come near you not to come near you. That also helps players in your party with better management of combat. So consider this, control is a very important tidbit of your offensive spells. They don't always necessarily have to do damage. You want the damaging ones in there, but considering how much control you should have in terms of your selection is also very important. Moving right along to second level, I'm gonna go over these very quick. I promise that I'm gonna do it, and I will, and I am. But I want people to read them. I don't want you to listen to me and say, okay, the bartender guy said this, so I'm taking this. I mean, if I have that kind of power, thank you, and I shouldn't. But again, I say, if you want a guide, go over to the internets. There are amazing guides out there, and they will tell you all you need to know about the spells and whether they're good or not, considering gameplay and optimization. Me, my role is a little bit more different. So, in second level, immediately what I'm going to look at is, again, the same logic. Damage, control, and utility. In terms of utility, silence. Silence is a spell that actually can help you a lot. Consider the fact that you are supposed to be a stealthier character. Silence can take that noise element out of an equation, and it can also make you be capable of infiltration and other interesting, weird mechanics, like, for example, taking away the ability to produce vocal components for spellcasters. So cast silence, get near a spellcaster, considering the fact that that spellcaster is going to want you in melee less than you're going to want anyone else to be in melee with you, then that can actually be a very interesting play. Other things like spike growth also can be a kind of like a trap spell. So it's good for control. It's good to get your party in a better position considering combat. What else, however? Pass Without Trace is another spell that captures my attention. Note that in second level, I still haven't spoken about anything that does damage. That is because the one that deals the damage is in first level. Pass Without Trace is a very, very stealth-oriented spell, and I would venture to say that it's the best one in terms of a character that's trying to be sneaky. So think about that when you're reading through the spells. Dark Vision, if you don't have it as a race, okay, maybe, because still you need to see what you're shooting at, so for rangers it's kind of important. And other stuff like, for example, Cord and Arrows, that's a damaging spell, but Hunter's Mark, come on, forget about it. Moving right along, spells at third level. I initially didn't see anything that captured my attention and went, yes, that's amazing, but Lightning Arrow. Lightning Arrow can actually be a very cool supplement to the damage that you can do. It also tends to hit other targets as well, so consider that when you're looking at that. And consider the fact that you can actually couple it with a few other abilities and spells, again, like Hunter's Mark. But then this other thing happened to me. I saw Conjure Animals, and I usually don't like conjuration spells. Not because they're bad, just because it doesn't necessarily make me go all giddy. But then Conjure Animals is actually a wonderful, wonderful selection. It's a very powerful spell, and it can help you, especially with the fact that you might have a beast already out there and under your control with its own initiative. So consider that if you conjure additional targets, that can be completely breaking for an encounter. Other stuff like Conjure Barrage can be an interesting selection for you because of the fact that it simply goes into one of those spell categories of shoot more arrows, which is good. In the previous videos, I keep saying that having multiple attacks is good, but being capable of shooting out more things per attack is better. So consider that and consider that spell. Other things at third level, read them. Check them out and see if anything catches your eye. For me, those are the ones that require the most attention. Moving on to level number 4, Stone Skin, immediately. I love the Stone Skin spell. It's widely underappreciated in my opinion. And not taking damage is good. Not taking damage is good for your Garden Variety Ranger because remember, if you're doing the logical approach that we just discussed, then you're not going to have the most constitution out of the melee classes in your party. So having additional defense is not bad, and for those moments where cover might not necessarily be available, or you're in that bad position, you might want to spend your concentration on a spell like Stone Skin. Other than that, freedom of movement can be very helpful. It's a really good buff, and if you're kind of getting into that whole, I don't want to be in this situation mood, then freedom of movement is going to be the most helpful thing you're going to have. And again, going on with the conjuration theme of what we just spoke about previously in the third level spells, Conjure Woodland Beings works literally the same way, but it's a bit more weird. It can end up being this very fun moment for the entire party, so consider that as well. And then fifth level spells. This is going to be the shortest one. Why? Not because there's the least amount of spells, but because there's 2 out there that will be necessary to you to be effective. Conjure Volley and Swift Quiver. More shooting and, well, more shooting. Shooting, getting that damage out there is going to be important. What else is good though? Well, to be fair, nothing in the player's handbook. That's your selection. Pick one and then go off of that. And that's pretty much all that I have to say about spells. I'm not going to get into any more details because I want people to have their actual experience and I want them to have this idea of, okay, he said that's not good, so maybe I shouldn't. No. Every spell can be good. Some spells are just more situational than others. What comes after spells though? Abilities. The abilities of the ranger, the core ones anyway, without you even having to pick a specialization yet, are what's going to drive most of the selection from this point on. what is the ranger good at? Sneaking, hunting, out there in the wilderness. One very specific point, however, is that most of those abilities are not ability score intensive. They are not coming off of how much you have in a particular ability. Instead, they are situational themselves, and they are also very passive. Consider your colleagues in the martial class variety. Consider the paladin, and the very first ability that the paladin receives scales off of how much of a particular ability score the paladin has. Rangers don't have that. Your ability score improvements are going to be dedicated to a different idea. You get 5 of them, kind of like every other class, except for the fighter and the rogue. You need to spend the beginning of these, the initial ones, in the level progression to get your stats to where they need to be. After that, however, or if you're a variant human, as we're going to talk about in a moment, you can dedicate the remainder to feats. And feats are important to you. They are very, very important because they are the last layer of stacking considering damage. Now remember how I keep saying that rangers are the best when it comes to stacking various effects to achieve damage. Well, feats are going to be the last layer of this. You have your abilities, you have your weapons, you have your spells. Now you can actually add feats on top of that. And when you take this entire amalgamation of effects, you can achieve something truly devastating. We're going to get into feats at the end of this video. Before that, now we have a very solid understanding of how a ranger is supposed to work. Again, garden variety, but let's get the basics down first, and then we're going to get into the more weird concepts. So now we have this understanding. What comes now? Well, race selection. What race are you will determine a lot about your character. Well, I mean, duh, right? But if you're willing to optimize, if that's what your idea is, then what are the best ones? Well, everything that gives you +2 to dexterity immediately demands your attention. But then afterwards, some races do give you better bonuses than others. And the one that I have found out to be the most easily insertable into a garden variety ranger is the wood elf. Right? I mean, come on. It's just right there. The ability score allocation is right there for you. Dex and wisdom. The passives are amazing. You get to sleep less and you can get rested more quickly. And most importantly, that ability that allows you to blend into your natural surroundings is unbelievably cool. It helps you with your stealth and is just so fluffy, but it also manages to be powerful when it comes to combat. Any ability that can be fluffy and also powerful in combat is good for you. What else is good though? I mean, pretty much all of the elves are going to be okay, but the wood elves is the one that you're gonna want to pick if you're optimizing. Now, having that idea in mind, halflings are going to be the next race that will immediately capture your attention, and captured mine in terms of rangering because they are small. Their bonuses do stack with what we've been talking about, but the fact that they're a small creature adds this additional layer of defense if you're smart enough, if you're cunning enough, and that's so fun. They can get into cover easier than other races. Additionally, there is another idea about small creatures in rangers, and the fact that you have a beast that's medium-sized and it's always there for you. Just get on his back. Yeah, you can mount your beast, and that's actually a very fun build that you can do. It will allow you to do stuff that other classes and other builds simply cannot. And they're gonna stand there going, okay, that's kind of cool. Weird, but cool. So there you go. Smaller races can actually fit in there. Gnomes, not so much, but the halflings, yeah, halflings get in there, and halflings are amazing. And lastly, in terms of the player's handbook and what's good for a ranger build, the variant human. The variant human is perhaps the best race for a lot of builds, simply because it does give you access to a feat before you even get to start leveling. That can free you up tremendously. And remember, when we get to feats, I'm going to say it again, as a matter of fact, that's next, but smooth transition incoming. Feats go into a few categories, and the main category of feats are feats that you can make your entire character build around. Remember that. There are supplementary feats, there are feats that go into the last third category that I like to keep calling, you sure you have all your ability scores set before taking this feat? But the first one, the primary one, are feats that can make your entire character work. And if you're a garden variety ranger and a variant human and you take sharpshooter, you're already ahead of the curve. You're already doing stuff easier and with greater effectiveness than any other class, any other build in your party. So there you go. When you consider races, think about what they give you. If they give you that +2 dex, if they give you wisdom, if they give you something passive that allows you to be more sneaky or more, let's say, supporting in combat, then it's good. But for a garden variety build, wood elf, halfling, there you go. And also variety human. Right. Now then, before we get into the feats, let's very quickly take a look at the backgrounds that we have available to us. And this is going to be the shortest segment because there are two. There are two that are going to demand your attention, and those two are Outlander and Sailor. Outlander blends. It just so perfectly fits into the idea of what you want to do. That is just, well, yeah. And all the bonuses are right there for you. It stacks. It gives you that natural explorer. So do I really need to say anything more? Outlander, Ranger, come on, it's right there. The other one, however, and the one that surprised me, was Sailor. Sailor actually gets into what you want to do. It does give you athletics, yeah, and also perception. Perception kind of important. It does allow you to get your acrobatics from another source, meaning your class, and naturally it kind of sticks so well because everything kind of tends to fit with what you want to be doing. But in terms of backgrounds, that's it. That's pretty much everything that you want to take a look at. Everything else can be made to fit, like for example the Urchin. It does give you those two skills with dexterity and also the idea of being a city-dwelling kind of a outcast that ran away and now he or she lives into the forest. But those bonuses are not necessarily what you're going for. I mean, it's not what you want to have in your Garden Variety Ranger. Criminal can also be interesting. Again, fluff-wise can be made to work, but those bonuses are not as well suited as the Outlander or the Sailor. And with that being said, moving right along, let's get into the feats. Let's bite into this apple of goodness that the feats present you with. What feats are going to be the ones that you build your entire idea around? Well, as I said already, Garden Variety, that's going to be Sharpshooter. But if you want to go more into the melee kind of approach and you don't necessarily want to be the guy who plinks from behind everyone else and deals the damage and never gets a scratch, which why? But if you don't want to be that guy, consider Dual Weapon Fighter. That's that feat that allows you to do more stuff with two weapons. It allows you to draw them. It gives you 1 AC. Everything that you need in terms of fighting with two weapons in melee. And if those weapons are finesse, maybe also light, as a matter of fact, with the feat they don't need to be, then you're already ahead of the curve. What else is going to be there for you in terms of a build maker? Well, for the Garden Variety Ranger, nothing. That's it. There you go. That's the simple build. Go into Dex, pick a race that gives you the bonuses, the one that we discussed so far. Get Sharpshooter and you are already a complete build. Everything else is going to come off of your spells, off of your abilities, off of the class's specificities. What other builds are there though? I keep saying that, like, that's the Garden Variety. What else is there? There is an idea that you can make a strength-based ranger. A ranger that doesn't necessarily have to hide. A ranger that can go off of the usual barbarian, fighter, paladin, strength, good old-fashioned approach. Yes, you can. As a matter of fact, that is a build that is worth consideration. My initial reaction to that every time is, why? Why would you want to do that? And the only response that does make sense to me personally is if you're a Beastmaster. If you're a Beastmaster and you have that additional character, which is now in the reworked Rangers, they are a character in themselves, yes, you can go into strength. And that's actually a very potent build that requires some different approaches. So instead of Dex, you're going to want to invest more into strength. And that now turns around the logic. You're better at strength, but you also have the dexterity saving throw, which does allow you to stick it out in melee a little bit differently than the fighter and the barbarian. You also have the beast, but now wisdom is going to have to be your tertiary stat because you're gonna need that constitution. So now you're going more into the fighter logic. Get your strength where it needs to be, get your constitution where it needs to be, work with your pet in tandem. And remember, you don't have multiple attacks now. You're going to have to work with the pet in order to actually be effective. What this build is amazing at is crowd control. You don't need spells for crowd control because between yourself and the pet, you can control multiple avenues on the battlefield by yourselves. And that's very powerful. Other than this, how you're going to deal your damage? Well, again, the fighter builds. Consider two weapons. Consider something large, cumbersome, sharp, or blunt, wielded in two hands, and something that can make your hunter's mark go completely utilized. With this build, you're gonna need something very, very direct, let's say, and applicable to somebody's face. Having said that, fighting with two weapons, one in each hand, is also an interesting approach when it comes to the strength build. And I mean, there's that one character from the Warcraft 3 campaign. If you don't know who I'm talking about, go play that campaign. You're essentially doing that. You're this big, beefy person wielding a weapon in each hand. That gives you additional 1 armor class, by the way, don't forget. And you can institute a lot of control on the battlefield. Coupled with your pet, it's just amazing. Another interesting build that I would like somebody to go into, I personally haven't had the time nor the opportunity to play with, is a Constitution Ranger. that same idea that we just discussed, but instead of focusing on attacking, which is essentially what the ranger is supposed to do, couple that with your pet and just stack constitution, stack toughness, the toughness feat on top of all of that, and now you have this very tanky duo in the center of the battlefield that's just roaring and throwing people left and right, or, well, not necessarily, but taking whatever the enemy has to throw at you. This is an interesting approach to combat. It's a very tanky build, and it can actually work. Maybe also couple it with a shield. That's interesting. Rangers can have shields, don't forget. So that's kind of an interesting approach as well. But the one that I want to spend the most time on is the one that allows you to mount your pet. If you're a smaller character, if you're a race that's actually small in stature like the halflings, whatever kind of pet that you take, bonus points if you take the ape, by the way, because that's just adorable and hilarious at the same time, you can work the entirety of combat from the back of your pet. And additional to that, there is a feat, it's called Mounted Combatant, that's going to be the cornerstone of this build. That one feat is going to give you all the versatility that you need in tandem with your pet, and it's just amazing. So there you go. Those are some of the builds that I have seen and that we have come up with. And that's pretty much all I've wanted to say about the Ranger for so long now. I'm really glad these videos are finally out. Before we end this, just a quick summary and just a quick overall impression. Rangers are the tweener martial class, okay? They're the best when it comes to using a ranged weapon. They're the best when it comes to fighting multiple enemies because they don't necessarily need to rely on the number of attacks that they can do. They're the ones with the pet as well. So in my mind, they actually are now right where they need to be in terms of the martial class quartet. You have a martial class for every kind of idea that you might want to put out there. And Rangers now fit this so well. It's just heartwarming and I love it. There you go. Give us your thoughts about the Ranger. Do you like playing them? I believe so. Come on, if you're sticking to the end of this, then I hope you're really liking the Ranger. Let us know. If you're still here and you're still listening, thank you so much. What do you think? If you like, then hit that like. If you dislike, hit that dislike. If you want to comment, the comment section is down below. Pay attention to the description of the video. There's usually a lot of useful links down there. Feel free to establish contact with us however you feel like. We try to be as responsive as we can. And that's about it. Go play some games.